Hello, my friends. Imagine the Earth not as it is today, but wrapped in endless white. A silence so deep even the wind seemed to rest. This was not a fantasy landscape, nor a distant planet. It was our Earth during one of its long winters. An ice age. When you think of our planet today, you might picture blue oceans, swirling clouds, and continents shaped much as they are now. But Earth has never been static. Its face has changed many times, slowly but powerfully, in rhythms far beyond the span of a human life. Across millions of years, glaciers have advanced and retreated, carving mountains, drowning valleys, and raising new land from the sea. The Ice Age story is one of cold, yes, but also of transformation. The idea of an ice age was not always obvious. For much of human history, people explained strange landscapes with myths. A massive boulder perched in a meadow, far from any mountain. Perhaps it was placed there by giants. Deep scratches across bare rock, pointing in the same direction. Maybe they were marks of a great flood, or claws of a mythical beast. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, scientists began to see these clues differently. They realized that enormous rivers of ice, glaciers, had once moved across lands where no ice remains today. These glaciers were not just high in the Alps or the Himalayas. They had reached into the heart of Europe, into North America, leaving scars that even now are easy to trace. This was a revelation. It meant that Earth's climate could swing between extremes, that there were ages not just of warmth, but of cold so deep and so lasting that entire continents were buried. In the 1830s, a Swiss scientist named Louis Agassiz championed this idea, despite skepticism. He pointed to the polished rocks and giant erratic boulders scattered across Switzerland and beyond. He argued that only ice, moving mile after mile over thousands of years, could have carried them. The more scientists looked, the more they found evidence: moraines, U-shaped valleys, the fingerprints of glaciers written into stone. But this discovery raised a deeper question. Why? What could possibly cause the Earth to freeze so profoundly, and then to thaw again? The 19th century did not yet have the answers. Even today, we are still unravelling the full story. Yet slowly, layer by layer, science has shown us the patterns. At the core is the sun. Our planet is warmed by its rays, and cooled when that energy is spread thin. But Earth does not orbit in a perfect circle. Its path wobbles, tilts, and stretches in cycles that last tens of thousands of years. Sometimes those cycles align in ways that give the northern hemisphere less sunlight. Summers become cooler, and snow does not fully melt. Year after year, the snowpack thickens into ice. With time, glaciers grow, and ice sheets expand. A small shift in sunlight, amplified over centuries, can blanket continents. If you stood in Europe during the last ice age, you would not have recognised it. From what is now Germany northward, thick ice covered the land. Britain was locked under glaciers. Scandinavia was buried beneath miles of frozen weight. In North America, ice sheets stretched from the Arctic all the way to what is now New York and Chicago. Mountains disappeared beneath them. Valleys filled. Oceans shrank as water was trapped in ice, and coastlines extended far outward. What we see as permanent features today, bays, cliffs, islands, were temporary shapes drawn and redrawn by ice. The ice ages were not singular. There were many. Over the last 2.5 million years, Earth has entered and left these cold phases again and again. Each glaciation lasted tens of thousands of years. Between them, shorter intervals of warmth, known as interglacials, allowed forests to spread and animals to thrive. We live in one of those interglacials now, the Holocene, a warm pause in Earth's icy rhythm. From a planetary perspective, our climate today is unusual. It is a breath of warmth in a long pattern of cold. How do we know all this? Evidence is hidden in the planet itself. Deep beneath Greenland and Antarctica, ice cores preserve bubbles of ancient air. These bubbles are tiny time capsules, revealing levels of carbon dioxide, methane, and even traces of volcanic eruptions. Sediments at the bottom of oceans record microscopic fossils that shift with temperature. Together, they give us a timeline: when the ice grew, when it melted, and how life responded. Still, the story of the ice ages is not only geological, it is human as well. Though our species is young compared to these cycles, we emerged during one of the most recent ice ages. The world of our ancestors was colder, harsher, more unpredictable than ours. For them, survival meant adapting to shifting landscapes, crossing frozen plains, and enduring long winters with little food. The Ice Ages shaped not only the land, but us. But before we follow humans into this frozen past, it helps to pause here, at the beginning of the idea. Picture a scientist in the early 1800s walking across a Swiss valley. He notices boulders, enormous and heavy, scattered like dice across the countryside. They are not native to the rock beneath his feet. They came from distant mountains. How did they arrive? Not by human hands, not by floods or storms, but by slow, relentless rivers of ice. It is almost unsettling to think that the ground beneath us is not fixed, but carved and recarved by forces larger than imagination. That landscapes we see as eternal, a valley, a river, a mountain slope, are temporary sketches in a longer story. Yet this is the truth of Earth. The mystery deepens when you consider timing. The last ice age ended only about 12,000 years ago. That may sound ancient, but in geological terms, it is a blink. In fact, if you look at human history, it is almost yesterday. Agriculture began just as the ice retreated. Cities rose only after the climate stabilized. In a sense, everything we call civilization is a child of the ice, born in the warmth that followed. And so, as you settle into the rhythm of this story, imagine the Earth as it was, not as it is. Imagine the silence of ice stretching across continents. Imagine animals adapted to endless winter. Imagine small bands of humans, huddled by firelight, listening to the winds howl outside their shelters. This was not another world. This was our world, not so long ago. But what invisible forces pulled the strings? What aligned Earth's orbit, tilted its axis, and cooled its summers so that glaciers marched south? In the next part of this journey, we'll step deeper into the hidden mechanics, the subtle breath of a planet, and how its rhythm sets the stage for everything that lives upon it. If you step outside on a clear night and look at the sky, it may seem eternal and still. The stars shine in their places, the moon drifts along its familiar path, and the earth spins in a rhythm you can trust. Yet in truth, nothing about our planet's motion is perfectly steady. Earth wobbles, leans, and stretches as it makes its way around the sun. And it is these subtle, slow motions, invisible to anyone in a single lifetime, that set the stage for ice to grow or to melt. Scientists call these changes the Milankovitch cycles, named after a Serbian mathematician, Milutin Milankovic, who studied them in the early 20th century. He devoted years of his life to calculating the exact ways Earth's orbit changes over tens of thousands of years. At the time, Many thought he was chasing shadows, but his work revealed something profound. The rhythm of the ice ages was tied to the rhythm of Earth's orbit. Let's start with the simplest, the shape of Earth's orbit. It is not a perfect circle. Instead, it slowly shifts between being more round and more stretched, or elliptical. When the orbit is more elliptical, the distance between Earth and the Sun changes more dramatically during the year. Sometimes this makes summers hotter and winters colder. Other times, depending on how it aligns, it means cooler summers, which is crucial for ice growth. This cycle, called eccentricity, takes about 100,000 years to complete. Next, imagine Earth as a spinning top. A top doesn't spin perfectly upright forever. It begins to wobble. Earth does the same. Its axis, the line around which it rotates, wobbles in a slow circle. This is called precession. Over about 26,000 years, the axis points in different directions in the sky. Today the North Pole points toward Polaris, the North Star. Thousands of years ago it pointed to a different star. And thousands of years in the future, it will point elsewhere. This wobble changes which hemisphere tilts toward the Sun at different times of year, shifting the intensity of seasons. There is also the tilt itself. Earth is tilted about 23.5 degrees relative to its orbit, which is why we have seasons at all. But this tilt is not fixed. It varies between about 22 and 24.5 degrees over a cycle of 41,000 years. A greater tilt means more extreme seasons, hotter summers, colder winters. A smaller tilt means milder seasons. And here lies the key. When tilt is smaller, summers in the high latitudes are cooler. Cool summers mean snow from winter is less likely to melt. Snow that stays behind becomes the seed for ice sheets. Taken together, these cycles act like gears in a vast clock. When they line up in certain ways, they cool the northern hemisphere's summers just enough to let glaciers spread. Over centuries, ice builds, reflecting more sunlight back into space, which cools the planet further. This feedback loop magnifies the initial shift until an ice age takes hold. When the gears align differently, summers become warmer and ice retreats. You might wonder, why is the northern hemisphere so important? After all, the planet is round, with two poles. The reason is land. Most of Earth's land is in the north, and land responds to snow and ice much more strongly than oceans do. A snowy continent reflects sunlight away, while an ocean tends to absorb it. So, small changes in northern sunlight ripple out to affect the whole globe. Evidence for these cycles comes not from theory alone, but from the Earth's archives. In the 1970s, scientists drilled deep into the ocean floor and examined layers of tiny fossil shells called foraminifera. These creatures lived near the surface, and the chemistry of their shells recorded the temperature of the water they grew in. By stacking these records from around the world, researchers could see a repeating pattern: warm, cold, warm, cold, stretching back millions of years. The timing matched Milankovitch's calculations almost exactly. What had once seemed a distant mathematical exercise turned out to be written into the bones of the Earth itself. Think about that for a moment. A planet's slow wobble, the tilt of its axis, the stretch of its orbit, all playing together like notes in a quiet symphony. Over tens of thousands of years, they changed the face of the Earth, deciding whether ice sheets advance across continents or melt back into the sea. And here you are, lying on this same planet, listening to a story that began long before humans ever walked beneath these skies. In your daily life, these cycles are imperceptible. The tilt does not shift enough in a year to notice. The orbit does not stretch within a human lifetime, yet they are always at work, like the slow breathing of the Earth. You might think of them as the heartbeat of the climate system. Consider how these changes ripple outward. When the summers cool in the north, snow lingers. Glaciers creep down mountain valleys. Forests retreat. Grasslands spread. Animals migrate or adapt. Humans, when they appear much later, must follow these shifts, crossing new lands opened by lower seas, retreating from advancing ice walls. The cycles are not just abstract mechanics. They shape the possibilities for life itself. And yet, it's not only orbital mechanics that drive the ice ages. Other forces add their weight. Volcanoes release carbon dioxide and ash, cooling or warming the atmosphere. Ocean currents shift, carrying heat differently across the globe. But the orbital cycles are the underlying rhythm, the metronome that sets the tempo. The other forces play variations on top of it, sometimes amplifying, sometimes softening the changes. There is also a delicate balance between sunlight and feedback. Ice is reflective. It bounces sunlight back into space. When ice grows, the planet cools further, which makes ice grow more still. On the other hand, when ice melts, darker ground and ocean absorb more heat, leading to further warming. This push and pull means that small shifts in orbital geometry can be magnified into massive climate changes. Pause for a moment and imagine standing at the edge of a glacier during one of these cooler summers. The ice creaks and groans as it flows downhill, a river of frozen time. You feel the chill in the air, even on a day that should be warm. The sun arcs low across the sky, weaker than you expect, and the snow beneath your feet never fully melts. You are experiencing, in that moment, the combined effect of three slow dances: eccentricity, tilt, and precession, unfolding invisibly in the heavens. Milankovitch himself never saw the full confirmation of his theories. He lived in a time when evidence was sparse and controversial, but today we know he was right. Satellite measurements track Earth's orbit with exquisite precision, confirming the cycles he calculated by hand. Ice cores and ocean sediments show the fingerprints of those cycles etched again and again into climate history. The match is too perfect to be coincidence. And here is where the curiosity deepens. If these cycles are so regular, then the ice ages should also be predictable. In theory, we can look forward in time and see when the next major glaciation should begin. By the natural rhythm, Earth should be slowly sliding back toward cooler summers in the coming tens of thousands of years. Yet, the story may not unfold as expected. Human activity has begun to add its own weight to the system, releasing greenhouse gases that trap heat. Some scientists argue that we may have already postponed the next ice age by tens of thousands of years. The thought is staggering. A planet that has known cycles of ice for millions of years might, for the first time, be pushed onto a different path. But that is a mystery for later in our journey. For now, we remain with the cycles themselves, steady and ancient, the quiet breath of a planet. To put it in perspective, think of your own breath. Inhale, exhale. Each cycle is short, seconds at most. Now imagine a breath that lasts tens of thousands of years. A breath so long that no single creature could ever perceive it. That is Earth's breath, carried out in the form of these orbital rhythms. The glaciers grow on the inhale and retreat on the exhale. We live within one of these breaths, barely aware of it, yet shaped by it in ways we are only beginning to understand. As you drift deeper into this story, let yourself feel the scale. Human lives are brief sparks. Civilizations rise and fall within the space of a few warm centuries, but above it all, the Earth continues its long, slow dance with the sun. A dance of tilts, wobbles, and stretches, invisible but inexorable. And so, the great question emerges. If ice builds when summers cool, what happens when those glaciers grow large enough to reshape the planet itself? How do oceans, rivers, and coastlines respond when trillions of tons of water are locked away on land? That is where our journey will take us next, as we follow the glaciers south and watch the seas fall, revealing a world that seems at once familiar and alien. When snow falls, it feels delicate. A flake drifts onto your hand, melts instantly, and is gone. Yet if enough snow falls year after year, and if summers are too cool to melt it away, something remarkable happens. The snow piles up, compresses under its own weight, and turns to ice. Over centuries, what begins as fragile flakes becomes a vast sheet, a glacier. And when glaciers grow large enough, they reshape the world. During the peak of the last ice age, enormous ice sheets blanketed entire continents. North America was covered by the Laurentide ice sheet, a mass of frozen water stretching thousands of kilometres. It reached from the Arctic all the way to the present-day Ohio River, from the Atlantic coast deep into the Canadian prairies. Its thickness was staggering, in places more than 3 kilometres thick, enough to bury mountains and grind them down. In Europe, another great sheet spread across Scandinavia, Britain, and much of northern Germany and Poland. The Alps held their own mountain glaciers, and so did the Himalayas. Even in the southern hemisphere, in Patagonia and New Zealand, ice carved valleys and spread outward. The planet was colder, drier, and locked in a frozen grip. The growth of these ice sheets had consequences far beyond the land they covered. When water is stored as ice on land, it cannot remain in the ocean. Sea levels dropped, not just by a few meters, but by more than 100. Entire coastlines shifted outward. If you could have walked along the shore during the Ice Age, you would have found the sea far away from where it is now. Places that today are underwater plains were once exposed land. Imagine walking across what is now the English Channel. Instead of water separating Britain from France, there was a broad grassy plain, dotted with rivers and lakes. Herds of animals roamed there, and humans could walk freely from one side to the other. In Southeast Asia, the shallow seas between islands receded, joining lands into a vast connected region called Sunderland. In the north, a land bridge called Beringia linked Siberia to Alaska, opening a frozen highway for humans and animals between Asia and the Americas. These shifts were not small details. They changed migration routes, shaped ecosystems, and allowed life to move in ways impossible today. Species spread across continents, carried by these temporary bridges of land. When the seas later rose again, those paths were cut off, leaving animals and people isolated on islands or continents, their fates diverging forever. The ice did more than lower seas. As glaciers advanced, they acted like slow, relentless bulldozers. They carved valleys into U-shapes, scraped away soil, and ground rock into fine powder known as glacial flour. This powder was carried by rivers and winds, spreading across landscapes and creating fertile soils in regions far from the glaciers themselves. The plains of northern Europe, the American Midwest, and parts of China owe much of their richness to sediments left behind by ice. You can see the fingerprints of this process even today. The Great Lakes of North America, Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario, were carved by glaciers. As the ice retreated, meltwater filled the deep basins, leaving behind freshwater seas that remain among the largest in the world. Norway's fjords, steep valleys filled with seawater, are also gifts of glaciers, carved deep into bedrock by rivers of ice. Pause for a moment and picture this transformation. Where now there are cities, there once was ice. Where now oceans lap against coasts, there was dry land. Every river course, every valley floor, every fertile plain you see today carries the legacy of those frozen centuries. For humans, these changes were both challenges and opportunities. Lower seas revealed new hunting grounds, but advancing ice forced migration southward. Cold, dry climates meant fewer forests and more grasslands. Large animals thrived in these open environments, and humans followed them. The landscape was in constant flux, demanding adaptation at every turn. One of the most striking images from this time is Doggerland, a vast plain that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. Rivers meandered across it, forests grew, and people lived there, hunting and gathering along its shores. Today, it lies beneath the North Sea, drowned when the ice melted and seas rose again. For thousands of years, it was home, and then it vanished, swallowed by the returning ocean. The cycle of ice building and oceans falling was slow on a human scale, but swift on a geological one. Glaciers might advance for tens of thousands of years, then retreat in just a few thousand. The land they uncovered bore the marks of their passage: scraped rocks, scattered boulders carried from far away, ridges of debris called moraines. Each was a reminder of the ice that once dominated the land. This constant reshaping had ripple effects far beyond the frozen zones. When ice sheets grew, the climate across the world shifted. Rain patterns changed, deserts expanded, and ecosystems reorganized. Africa, for instance, experienced shifts in rainfall that influenced the spread of grasslands and forests. These shifts, in turn, affected the animals that lived there, and the humans who depended on them. The story of ice building and oceans falling was not confined to the north. It echoed across every continent. Even oceans themselves responded in complex ways. Lower sea levels changed currents, altering how heat and nutrients were distributed. Coastlines stretched farther outward, creating shallow continental shelves that supported rich ecosystems. Coral reefs, which thrive near the shore, shifted with the seas, leaving behind fossilized remains far inland. When we study these fossils today, we see the map of ancient coastlines, drawn in stone. It is humbling to realize how temporary our familiar landscapes are. The coasts we know, the valleys we cherish, the fertile plains that feed us. All of these were shaped by ice and water, growing and shrinking in cycles we rarely notice. To our eyes, a shoreline may seem eternal. To the earth, it is only a passing sketch. As you listen, let yourself imagine the earth at the height of its icy breath. Rivers slowed, locked beneath frozen blankets. Winds carried fine dust across continents, turning skies hazy. Herds of mammoths and bison moved across plains that no longer exist. Humans walked paths now buried beneath oceans. It was a world colder and harder, but still alive, still adapting. And here lies a question to linger on. If ice could cover so much of the earth, and oceans could fall so far, what did that mean for the creatures who lived through it? How did life, from giant mammals to small human groups, find ways to endure? That is the mystery waiting ahead. In the next part of this journey, we will meet the giants of the Ice Age, the mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, the towering ground sloths. Creatures adapted to a frozen earth, thriving in the cold, only to face their own endings as the climate shifted once more. When you picture the Ice Age, you might imagine a landscape of snow and ice stretching endlessly. But within that frozen world lived creatures unlike anything we see today. Towering, powerful, and strange, they were the giants of the cold. They roamed across plains of grass, through frozen valleys, and along the edges of glaciers. These animals were not myths. They were real, and they thrived for tens of thousands of years. Perhaps the most iconic of them all was the woolly mammoth. Standing more than 3 meters tall at the shoulder, with long curved tusks stretching up to 4 meters, mammoths looked both familiar and alien. They were close relatives of today's elephants, but adapted for cold. Their thick coats of shaggy fur, layers of fat beneath the skin, and small ears helped them retain heat in icy winds. Herds of mammoths moved across the mammoth steppe, a vast region of grassland stretching from Spain to Siberia to North America. Where we see frozen tundra today, they saw open grazing fields. Mammoths were not alone. Alongside them lived mastodons, also elephant-like, but with shorter, straighter tusks and teeth suited for browsing on branches and leaves. They preferred forests, feeding on shrubs and trees where they could find them. Together, mammoths and mastodons occupied different niches, much as elephants in Africa today divide the savanna and the forest. Predators stalked these herds. Among them was the saber-toothed cat, with fangs up to 20 centimeters long. Known scientifically as Smilodon, it was built not for speed but for ambush, with muscular forelimbs and jaws that opened wide to deliver a killing bite. These cats lived in the Americas, hunting large prey, and their bones are preserved in places like the La Brea tar pits in California, where countless animals became trapped in the sticky asphalt over thousands of years. There were also cave lions, larger than any lions alive today, roaming Europe and Asia. They hunted horses, reindeer, and sometimes even young mammoths. Cave art left by humans shows these lions with tufted tails and powerful bodies, suggesting they left a deep impression on those who saw them. Other giants were less familiar. In South America, enormous ground sloths grazed on leaves and shrubs, some standing 6 meters tall when they reared up. In Australia, marsupial lions and giant kangaroos filled the ecological roles of predators and grazers. On islands, strange variations evolved: dwarf elephants, giant rodents, birds too large to fly. The Ice Age was not a uniform world, but a patchwork of habitats, each with its own giants. What made these animals so large? Part of the answer lies in the environment. Cold climates favoured larger bodies, which lose heat more slowly. Vast grasslands provided food for massive grazers, and the presence of large prey allowed predators to grow to enormous sizes. It was an age when being big was often an advantage. Life on the mammoth steppe was not easy, but it was abundant. Herds of bison, horses, and reindeer shared the plains with mammoths. Predators followed them, while scavengers waited for scraps. Wolves, hyenas, and vultures all had roles to play. It was a fully functioning ecosystem, different from ours but no less complex. Imagine standing on one of those plains. The air is cold, but the ground is dry, not covered in ice as you might expect. Before you, a herd of mammoths moves slowly, their breath steaming in the frosty air. Calves walk close to their mothers, protected by the circle of the herd. In the distance, bison graze, their heads sweeping side to side. A shadow passes over them. A cave lion moving low through the grass. The scene is alive with sound. The rumble of mammoth footsteps, the snort of horses, the distant howl of wolves. This was the Ice Age world, teeming with life. Yet even as these giants thrived, their time was limited. About 12,000 years ago, as the Ice Age ended and the climate warmed, many of them disappeared. Mammoths vanished from most of their range. Saber-toothed cats and cave lions went extinct. Ground sloths and mastodons were gone. The reasons remain debated, but most scientists agree it was a combination of two forces: changing climate and the spread of humans. As ice sheets retreated, forests replaced grasslands. The mammoth steppe shrank, reducing the food available for large grazers. At the same time, humans expanded into new territories. Skilled hunters with stone-tipped spears and coordinated strategies. Humans posed a new threat to animals that had never faced such predators before. Even low hunting pressure could have tipped already stressed populations toward extinction. The story is not entirely one of loss. Some giants survived. Bison, moose, and reindeer continued into the present. Elephants, close relatives of mammoths and mastodons, live on in Africa and Asia. But the Ice Age world, with its saber-toothed cats and towering sloths, is gone. It exists now only in bones, in frozen carcasses preserved in Siberian permafrost, and in the stories we piece together from cave art and fossils. One of the most haunting discoveries comes from the Siberian tundra, where mammoths sometimes emerge from melting permafrost, almost intact. Their fur, skin, and even stomach contents remain, frozen for tens of thousands of years. Looking at them is like looking back in time, into a world that vanished but never fully left us. For humans, these animals were not just part of the landscape, but part of their lives. Cave paintings from Chauvet and Lascaux in France show lions, bison, and mammoths drawn with care and detail. Hunters depended on these animals for meat, hides, bones, and tusks. They built shelters from mammoth bones, carved tools, and crafted art. The giants of the Ice Age were not only ecological partners, but cultural foundations. And still, a question lingers. Why did they disappear so suddenly, after surviving many cycles of ice and warmth before? If climate alone had driven them to extinction, we might expect a slower decline. If humans alone had done it, we might expect uneven patterns across continents. Instead, the truth seems to be a combination. A perfect storm of shrinking habitats, dwindling food, and human pressure. This mystery keeps scientists searching. Some argue that diseases brought by humans or their animals may have played a role. Others point to catastrophic climate shifts like the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to cold conditions. Whatever the exact causes, the result was the same. The giants were gone, and the world was forever changed. Their loss still echoes. Without mammoths, grasslands turned to tundra and forest. Without giant grazers, ecosystems shifted in ways we are still learning to understand. The Ice Age giants remind us how fragile even the mightiest species can be, dependent on climates and environments they cannot control. And yet, their story does not end entirely. In labs today, scientists are studying the DNA of mammoths preserved in frozen remains. Some even dream of bringing them back using genetic engineering and cloning. Whether that will ever succeed is uncertain, but the fascination shows how deeply these animals still live in our imagination. As you let these images settle in your mind, picture once more the vast steppe. The cold wind sweeps across it, bending grasses low. A herd of mammoths moves steadily, their tusks glinting in the pale sunlight. A saber-toothed cat crouches, muscles tensed. The earth is locked in its icy rhythm, and the giants rule the land. But time is always moving. The ice will not last forever. Warmth will return, glaciers will retreat, and seas will rise. The giants will fade, leaving only their bones and their shadows, and humanity, small but resourceful, will carry their memory forward. In the next part of this journey, we will follow those first humans more closely. How they entered the frozen landscapes, how they survived, and how the Ice Age shaped the very roots of human life. When the first true humans stepped into the icy world of the Pleistocene, they were not armed with machines or walls, nor with written language or complex cities. They were small groups of hunter-gatherers, moving cautiously across a landscape that seemed almost designed to test their endurance. The Ice Age was not simply a wall of ice. Much of the world beyond the great glaciers was dry and cold, dominated by open steppe or tundra. In these treeless expanses, winds swept unhindered across the ground. Winters were long, and summers were short. Yet here, humans began to thrive. They had no thick fur coats like the mammoths, no sharp teeth like the saber-toothed cats, and no wings to flee from predators. What they had instead was intelligence, adaptability, and cooperation. Imagine one of those small groups, perhaps 20 or 30 individuals, moving together across the mammoth steppe of Eurasia. Children cling to their mothers. Elders walk more slowly but share knowledge of plants and animal tracks. The group carries tools of stone, simple but sharp, and bundles of hides to wrap against the wind. Their shelters are temporary, built from branches, hides or bones. Fire is their constant companion, the small sun they carry into the dark. For daily survival, they hunted and gathered. Reindeer, horses and bison provided meat, bones and hides. Small animals and birds added to the diet, along with roots and berries when the season allowed. Hunting was dangerous and exhausting. Spears tipped with stone or bone were their primary weapons, sometimes thrown by hand, sometimes launched with a simple tool called an atlatl, which gave greater distance and power. Success depended on teamwork, driving herds into traps, surrounding prey, or waiting patiently for the right moment. When a large animal was killed, the entire group shared in the bounty. Hide became clothing and shelters, bones became tools, sinew became cord. Nothing was wasted. A mammoth kill could sustain a band for weeks, though bringing one down required immense skill and courage. Evidence from archaeological sites shows that early humans sometimes built entire huts from mammoth bones, covered with hides to keep out the wind. These shelters stood as testament to both ingenuity and necessity. Cold shaped not only their tools but their bodies. Fossil remains suggest that Ice Age humans were stockier than many people today, with shorter limbs that conserved heat. They adapted clothing from animal skins, sewn together with bone needles. They wore layers, fur turned inward for warmth, outer hides to block the wind. Boots, mittens, and hoods gave them protection that their bodies alone could not provide. At night, fire became more than warmth. It was safety against predators, light in the darkness, and a gathering point for the sharing of stories. Around the fire, knowledge was passed from generation to generation: where to find water in frozen land, how to recognize the tracks of prey, when to move camps to follow herds. Firelight cast shadows on cave walls, and in those shadows imagination grew. It is here that we find the roots of art. Deep inside caves, away from the bitter cold, humans painted animals they depended upon and feared, lions, bison, mammoths, reindeer. The caves of Chauvet, Altamira, and Lascaux preserve images tens of thousands of years old, drawn with pigments of charcoal and ochre. They were not idle decorations. They were acts of memory, reverence, perhaps even ritual. To draw a bison on the wall was to hold its spirit, to understand it more deeply, and to pass that knowledge to others. Some caves show handprints, made by blowing pigment around a palm pressed against the wall. These prints speak across time. Here was a person, cold and alive, reaching out to mark their presence. You can still see them today, vivid against stone. They remind us that Ice Age humans were not distant or alien, but people with hopes, fears, and creativity, just as we are. Survival in such a world required mobility. Camps rarely lasted long. Once the resources nearby were used, the group moved on. They followed the rhythms of the herds, the thought of rivers, the brief season of berries and roots. Migration was not only seasonal, but generational. Humans spread from Africa into the Middle East, then across Eurasia. Some moved north into Siberia, others west into Europe, and still others east across Beringia into the Americas. Each step was shaped by the ice, by the land bridges opened when seas fell, and by the challenges of climate. In these migrations, humans encountered other species of hominin. Neanderthals lived in Europe and Western Asia, well adapted to the cold with strong builds and large brains. For thousands of years, humans and Neanderthals shared the landscape, sometimes competing, sometimes interbreeding. Genetic studies show that people today still carry traces of Neanderthal DNA, a legacy of that Ice Age coexistence. Life was hard, but not without joy. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans created ornaments, beads, and carvings. They buried their dead with care, sometimes with tools or flowers. These acts hint at beliefs about life, death, and what lies beyond. Even in the frost, culture bloomed. Picture a camp in the evening. The day's hunt has brought in meat, and smoke rises from cooking fires. Children play, chasing each other in the snow. Adults repair tools, scrape hides, or rest. The elders tell stories of past hunts, of ancestors, of spirits tied to the land. Above, the stars wheel silently across the frozen sky. These humans lived with constant uncertainty, yet they found meaning, connection, and endurance. Their struggles shaped us. So the Ice Age forced creativity, new tools, new strategies, stronger social bonds. Language may have deepened during this time, as complex cooperation demanded clearer communication. Art, ritual, and shared memory became ways to bind groups together. The very foundations of human culture were laid in the frost, and still, questions remain. How did small groups survive winters when food was scarce? How far did they travel in a year? What songs did they sing? What dreams did they share as they lay beside their fires? We cannot know all the answers, but we glimpse them in the traces left behind. Stone blades, carved figures, painted walls, footprints fossilized in mud. Each is a whisper from the past. What is clear is that Ice Age humans were not passive victims of their environment. They were active, resilient, and ingenious. They adapted again and again, moving into new lands, facing new challenges, and carrying with them the seeds of what would become civilization. But their world was fragile. Climate could shift suddenly, rivers could freeze or flood, herds could vanish. Survival was never guaranteed, and so humanity learned to watch the sky, the seasons, the animals, to live in rhythm with a changing planet. That rhythm, forged in the cold, echoes in us still. As the Ice Age began to wane, humans would face new choices. Warmer climates opened fertile valleys, rivers swelled with meltwater, and forests spread into the grasslands. Some humans would remain hunters, following herds into the last wild plains. Others would settle, experimenting with seeds, planting crops, and beginning the slow shift toward farming. But those changes lay ahead. For now, picture again the frozen camp, the flicker of firelight on faces, the silence of snow outside. Small groups of humans, fragile yet determined, standing against the cold winds of the Ice Age. From them, every city, every culture, every voice listening to this story would one day descend. And here, a question rises softly. Could the very struggles of the Ice Age, the cold, the scarcity, the constant need to adapt, have shaped the minds and societies that would later flourish? Was the frost not only a challenge, but a teacher? In the next part, we will watch as the climate itself shifts suddenly, in centuries of chaos and change, testing both the giants and the humans who walked beside them. The turning of the climate will bring new mysteries, new dangers, and the seeds of the future. The Ice Age was never still, even in the midst of glacial centuries. When the world seemed locked in cold, the climate shifted and flickered, sometimes in ways so abrupt that entire landscapes transformed within a single lifetime. To understand how fragile the balance was, and how easily it could tip, we must look at the strange intervals when ice yielded suddenly to warmth, or when warmth collapsed back into cold. These moments of turning shaped both the Earth and the humans who lived upon it. About 20,000 years ago, the last great glaciation reached its peak. Ice sheets covered vast swathes of North America, Europe, and Asia. But slowly, as Earth's orbit shifted and summers grew warmer, the glaciers began to melt. Rivers of water flowed from their edges, carving new valleys, filling lakes, and carrying sediments to the sea. Forests began to creep northward, grasslands shifted, and animals moved with them. For humans, the world was changing again. At first, the shift seemed steady. Ice retreated, oceans rose, and the cold world softened. But then, about 2,900 years ago, something strange happened. Just as the Earth was warming, the climate snapped back into cold. This sudden return to glacial conditions is called the Younger Dryas, named after a small Arctic flower whose pollen appears in layers of sediment from that time. In just a few decades, temperatures in parts of the northern hemisphere dropped by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. For people alive then, it would have felt like the return of winter after the promise of spring. The cause of the Younger Dryas is still debated. One leading idea is that as glaciers melted, massive floods of fresh water poured into the North Atlantic. This disrupted the great ocean conveyor, the system of currents that carries warm water northward and cold water southward. With the currents slowed or shut down, heat could not flow as it once did, plunging the north back into cold. Some researchers suggest a comet impact may have triggered fires and cooling. Whatever the cause, the effect was profound. Imagine living at the edge of a retreating glacier. The land is greening, animals are returning, and seasons are gentler. Then, within a generation, the cold deepens again. Forests die back, rivers freeze longer, and herds migrate south. For humans, survival once more depended on adaptation. Some groups endured by following animals to warmer lands. Others retreated into refuges where plants and prey remained. The Younger Dryas lasted about 100 years, long in human terms, but short in geological ones. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. When warmth returned about 11,700 years ago, it did so with remarkable stability. This new epoch, called the Holocene, is the warm period we still live in today. Unlike the wild swings of the glacial past, the Holocene has been relatively calm, with only minor fluctuations. For humans, this stability was transformative. It allowed for the rise of agriculture, settlements, and eventually civilization itself. But before farming came, humans had to navigate the transition. Archaeological sites in the Middle East show how some groups began experimenting with new food sources even during the Younger Dryas. The Natufian culture, for example, harvested wild cereals, storing and processing them in stone mortars. They hunted gazelles and gathered nuts, living in semi-permanent villages. When the climate warmed again, these practices expanded into true agriculture. People domesticated wheat, barley and lentils, and with them, goats, sheep and cattle. The turning of the climate had set humanity on a new path. Hunting and gathering had sustained people for hundreds of thousands of years, but farming created surpluses, supported larger populations, and led to permanent settlements. Villages grew into towns, and towns into cities. The Ice Age, with its cycles of cold and warmth, had prepared humans for resilience, but the Holocene gave them the opportunity to flourish in new ways. Still, the memory of instability lingered. Myths of floods, endless winters, and sudden catastrophe may echo these ancient experiences. Oral traditions carried the warnings. The world can change quickly, and nothing is permanent. The impact of these shifts reached beyond humans. Animals that had thrived in the cold-faced collapse. The mammoth steppe, that immense grassland stretching across Eurasia and North America, shrank as forests spread. Mammoths and other grazers lost their habitat. Some survived in isolated refuges for thousands of years, like the small population of mammoths that lived on Wrangel Island in the Arctic until just 4,000 years ago. But for most, the warming world meant extinction. The Younger Dryas shows us that climate is not a smooth line, but a series of sharp turns. A planet can swing from cold to warm and back again within centuries or less. These swings shape not only ecosystems, but the trajectory of human culture. Without them, farming might have arisen differently, or not at all. Pause for a moment and imagine the uncertainty of that time. A family plants seeds in a sheltered valley, hoping they will grow. But the climate shifts, and frost kills the crop. Hunters set out after reindeer, but the herds vanish, moving beyond reach. Survival demanded constant vigilance, constant readiness to change. The Ice Age was a teacher of flexibility, and humans learned well. Today, when we study ice cores and sediments, we see the record of these shifts in microscopic detail. Layers of pollen reveal which plants grew where. Ratios of oxygen isotopes in ice tell us about past temperatures. Charcoal layers mark ancient fires. Each is a page in the diary of the Earth, showing not just the long sweep of glaciations, but the sudden, surprising turns. The Younger Dryas stands as one of the most dramatic examples, but there were other swings too. A little ice age cooled parts of the world just a few centuries ago, freezing rivers in Europe and shortening growing seasons. Even within the relative calm of the Holocene, the climate has never been perfectly still. For the humans of 12,000 years ago, however, the great turning point was clear. The Ice Age was ending. Glaciers retreated for the last time, seas rose steadily, and the world became warmer and wetter. Forests spread across Europe and Asia. In the Middle East, fertile lands along the Tigris, Euphrates, and Jordan rivers supported farming villages. In China, rice and millet were domesticated. In the Americas, maize, beans, and squash would follow. Each of these beginnings traces back to the end of the Ice Age. Without that shift, without the turning of the climate, the foundation of civilization might never have been laid. And yet, the story is not one of simple progress. Warmer climates brought new challenges. Floods from melting ice, diseases from crowded settlements, conflicts over resources. The Holocene gave opportunities, but it also demanded new solutions. Humans were no longer simply surviving in the frost. They were building lives in a world that could now support more of them. As you listen, let this lesson settle. Earth's climate can turn sharply, unpredictably, and with consequences that ripple across millennia. For humans, those turns were both trials and catalysts. Out of cold came endurance. Out of instability came innovation. Out of warmth came civilization. And here, a question lingers gently. What other surprises might Earth hold, hidden in the rhythm of its cycles? If the past brought sudden frost and sudden thaw, what turns might the future still carry? In the next part, we will follow the glaciers as they continue their retreat, watch seas rise to swallow ancient lands, and see how water reshaped not only coasts, but human destiny. The melting of giants would open a new chapter, one written in floods and in drowned worlds. As the Ice Age came to its end, the world began to melt. For tens of thousands of years, glaciers had built up across continents, holding vast reserves of water frozen in their icy grip. When warmth returned, those frozen giants began to retreat. Slowly at first, then with bursts of sudden collapse, they released their stored water back into the oceans. The Earth was transformed, not only by the disappearance of ice, but by the rising of the seas. Imagine watching a glacier at the close of the Pleistocene. It towers above you, a wall of ice stretching for kilometres, its surface cracked with blue fissures. In summer, streams of meltwater rush from its base, carrying rocks and sand. At its edges, enormous blocks carve away, crashing into rivers and lakes. Day by day, year by year, the glacier shrinks, exposing land that has been buried for millennia. But as the ice retreats, the oceans swell. Water once trapped on land returns to the sea, and shorelines shift. Over a span of just a few thousand years, global sea level rose more than 120 metres. To humans, living in small camps and early villages, the change would not have been a sudden flood, but a slow encroachment. A campsite near the coast one generation might lie, beneath shallow waves the next. Rivers carved new paths, lakes overflowed, and fertile plains were drowned. Some floods, however, were sudden and violent. In North America, as the Laurentide ice sheet melted, enormous glacial lakes formed along its edge. One of the largest was Lake Missoula, in what is now Montana. Periodically, ice dams holding the lake would break, unleashing catastrophic floods across the landscape. Walls of water hundreds of metres high roared westward, scouring valleys, moving boulders the size of houses, and leaving behind the scab lands of Washington state. These floods reshaped entire regions in days, carving canyons and depositing gravel bars visible even now. Far to the east, another flood may have changed human history. Around 8,000 years ago, the Black Sea was a freshwater lake, isolated from the Mediterranean by a natural dam. As sea levels rose, the Mediterranean spilled over, rapidly flooding the Black Sea basin. Villages along its shores were submerged, and fertile lands disappeared beneath salt water. Some scholars have even suggested that this event could lie behind ancient flood myths, preserved in oral traditions that later became part of epic tales. Everywhere, the rising seas redrew the map. Sunderland, the vast subcontinent that had once connected much of Southeast Asia, disappeared beneath the waves, leaving only scattered islands. Beringia, the land bridge between Asia and North America, was swallowed, cutting off the easy passage of humans and animals between the continents. In Europe, Doggerland, once a rich plain between Britain and the continent, vanished under the North Sea. Archaeologists have found traces of settlements there, tools, bones, even remnants of forests, reminders of a world lost to water. For the people of the time, these changes were deeply disruptive. Camps and hunting grounds that had supported generations were drowned. Rivers shifted, forcing new routes. Yet humans adapted once again. Some groups moved inland, others took to boats, beginning traditions of seafaring that would eventually connect distant lands. The changing coasts became new frontiers, filled with fish, shellfish, and other resources. What was lost on land was gained in the sea. The melting of ice also altered climates in complex ways. As glaciers disappeared, their reflective surfaces gave way to darker soils and forests, absorbing more sunlight. This feedback accelerated warming. At the same time, the influx of fresh water into oceans disrupted currents, altering weather patterns around the globe. Regions that had been fertile grew drier, while others saw increased rainfall. Humans, now experimenting with farming, found themselves challenged by these shifting patterns, forced to adjust crops and strategies. Even the land itself responded to the loss of ice. Under the weight of glaciers, the Earth's crust had been pressed downward. As the ice melted, the land began to rise again, a process called isostatic rebound. In Scandinavia and Canada, this uplift is still happening today, raising shorelines centimetre by centimetre each year. What appears to us as a stable Earth is, in truth, still moving, still recovering from the weight of the last ice age. Pause here and imagine the view from a high place, perhaps a cliff overlooking the sea 10,000 years ago. Below, waves lap against the shore, but year by year the water creeps higher. A favourite fishing spot disappears. A grove of trees becomes a marsh, then a tidal flat, then open sea. To the people who lived there, it must have seemed as if the earth itself was shifting beneath them, the land retreating, the ocean advancing without end. The memory of these rising waters may linger in stories. Across cultures, myths tell of great floods. The Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia, the story of Noah in the Hebrew Bible, tales from India, China, and the Americas. While not all can be traced to a single event, many may echo the real experiences of ancient peoples as seas rose and floods swept across their worlds. To live at the end of the Ice Age was to witness the power of water unleashed, slowly and suddenly reshaping life. Animals, too, were affected. Some species could adapt to shrinking habitats, others could not. As coasts flooded, migratory routes shifted. Grasslands dwindled, replaced by forests or seas. For megafauna already pressured by climate and human hunting, these changes hastened extinction. The mammoth steppe, once one of the richest ecosystems on Earth, fragmented and vanished. Where mammoths and bison had roamed, forests now stood. And yet, amid loss, new opportunities arose. Wetlands and estuaries blossomed along the new coasts, supporting birds, fish, and shellfish. Rivers swelled with meltwater, feeding fertile valleys. The Nile, the Tigris, the Yangtze, rivers that would nurture some of the first great civilizations, were shaped in part by the floods of melting ice. Humanity's future was bound to these waters, even as they erased the past. From a geological perspective, the end of the Ice Age was not a single event, but a long transition. Over thousands of years, glaciers melted, seas rose, and climates shifted. But to the people living through it, the changes were felt in daily life. The loss of a hunting ground, the encroachment of marshes, the need to move camp farther inland. Slowly, the familiar world was replaced by a new one. Consider once more the scale of it. More than 120 metres of sea level rise, enough to drown entire continents' worth of lowland. Today, cities like London, New York, and Shanghai stand on land that would have been far from the Ice Age coast. The shores we know are temporary, drawn in the brief calm between ice and flood. As the last great ice melted, humanity was already adapting in another way. Farming was spreading, villages were forming, and trade networks were beginning. Rising seas may have displaced communities, but they also concentrated people in fertile valleys and along coasts where resources were abundant. From disruption came new growth. And so, the melting of giants and the rising of seas were not only natural events, but pivotal moments in human history. They ended one chapter, the Ice Age world of mammoths and steppe, and began another, the Holocene world of agriculture, settlements, and civilization. As you listen, let your mind rest on the image of water rising. A glacier shrinks, its rivers rushing to the sea. An island disappears beneath waves. A plain becomes a bay. The earth breathes out warmth, and with it the oceans expand. Life must move, must change, must find new ground. And here is a question to drift upon. How much of our present world lies upon land that was once sea? And how much of our sea still hides the memory of human footsteps, forests and camps? Beneath the waves, traces of the Ice Age world remain, waiting for discovery. In the next part of this journey, we will follow those echoes, not in water, but in memory. In caves and myths, in stories passed through generations, the Ice Age still whispers to us. The echoes of stone and story will carry us deeper into the human experience of a frozen earth. When the glaciers carved valleys and rivers, they left behind not only stone and soil, but also places where humans sought shelter. Deep within caves, safe from wind and snow, early people left marks that still speak to us across tens of thousands of years. These marks are not written language, but they are stories, echoes of how humans understood their world in the age of ice. The caves of Chauvet in France are among the most famous. Hidden for millennia, their walls preserve images painted more than 30,000 years ago. Lions, bison, mammoths and rhinos stride across the stone, drawn in ochre and charcoal. The animals are dynamic, layered, sometimes even overlapping, as if the artists were trying to capture movement. In the flicker of torchlight, the images would have seemed alive, shifting as shadows danced across them. In Lascaux, another cave in France, hundreds of figures stretch across chambers. Horses gallop in long lines, bulls stand massive and imposing, deer leap gracefully. One chamber, often called the Hall of the Bulls, surrounds the visitor with animals so large they seem to press in from every side. For those who painted and those who watched, the effect must have been powerful. A recreation of the world outside, brought into the safe warmth of the cave. These paintings are not random decorations. They reveal a deep connection between humans and the animals they depended upon. The mammoth was food, clothing and shelter. The bison was a challenge and a prize. The lion was a rival predator. To paint them was perhaps to honour them, perhaps to call upon their spirits, or perhaps to teach younger generations about their forms and movements. Whatever the reason, the art speaks of reverence and memory. Other caves hold handprints, silhouettes made by blowing pigment over a hand pressed to the wall. Some are small, the hands of children. Some are missing fingers, perhaps a sign of ritual, or perhaps of frostbite in the unforgiving cold. Each handprint is a signature, a silent message across the ages. I was here. I lived in this world of ice. Sculptures and carvings also echo from this time. The so-called Venus figurines, small carvings of female form found across Europe, date to the Ice Age. Their meaning is debated. Some suggest they were symbols of fertility, others of survival or identity. They remind us that humans in the Ice Age did not think only of food and shelter, but of life, meaning, and continuity. The music, too, has left traces. Flutes made from bird bones and mammoth ivory, some more than 35,000 years old, have been found in caves in Germany. Their holes are carefully placed, suggesting that Ice Age humans played melodies not so different from ours. Imagine sitting in a cave, firelight flickering, listening to the haunting notes of a flute echoing off stone. Music, like art, was a way of making sense of a harsh world, of binding people together in shared rhythm and sound. Stories must have flowed around those fires as well, though they leave no direct trace. But oral tradition is strong, and some myths that survive today may carry fragments of Ice Age memory. Tales of great floods, of endless winters, of battles between fire and ice. These appear in cultures around the world. They may be echoes of real events. Floods from melting glaciers, sudden cold snaps, the struggle to survive in shifting climates. Myths preserve not exact history, but emotional truth. The awe and fear humans felt as the world around them changed. Consider how powerful these experiences must have been. To see a glacier creeping across the land, swallowing valleys. To watch seas rising slowly, covering familiar places. To hear the groan of ice, the roar of floods, the howl of predators in the night. Such events would naturally find their way into story and symbol, into paintings and songs, into rituals repeated for generations. Archaeologists uncover these traces carefully, layer by layer. A piece of charcoal, a carved bone, a footprint in ancient mud. Each adds to the picture. And while we cannot know every detail, we can sense the humanity in them. The person who drew a horse on a cave wall, who carved a flute, who pressed a hand to stone, was not so different from us. They felt cold, hunger, hope, and wonder. They sought to understand their world, to pass knowledge along, and to leave a mark that outlasted them. Even landscapes carry echoes of story. In Siberia, where permafrost still holds the remains of mammoths, local legends speak of giant creatures buried in the ground, too powerful to live on the surface. In parts of North America, tales of great floods and ice monsters may preserve memories of glacial melt and advancing ice sheets. Story and stone are intertwined, each preserving fragments of the past. The echoes are not only artistic or mythical, they are practical as well. Stone tools from the Ice Age show remarkable skill. Blades were flaked with precision, points crafted for spears and arrows. Some were hafted with wood and sinew, combining materials into complex tools. The craftsmanship reveals not only survival, but innovation, an ongoing conversation between humans and their environment. Pause for a moment and imagine one of these caves. The air is cool, still, and smells faintly of earth. A torch flickers, casting moving shadows. On the wall, animals emerge from the dark, drawn thousands of years ago by hands long gone. You press your own hand to the wall, over the faded outline of another, and feel a connection that stretches beyond time. In that moment, the Ice Age is no longer distant. It is present, alive in memory and stone. Why did humans create such art, music, and story in a time when survival was so difficult? Perhaps because survival is not only about food and shelter. It is also about meaning, about belonging, about making sense of the world. In the face of cold and uncertainty, humans created beauty. They told stories, sang songs, and painted walls. These acts did not put food on the fire, but they gave reason to endure, to continue, to hope. The echoes in stone and story remind us that even in the harshest times, humanity seeks more than survival. We seek connection, to each other, to the animals around us, to the land we walk upon. The Ice Age was not only a time of cold and struggle, it was also a time of creativity, imagination, and culture. And still, a question lingers. What other echoes have we lost? How many songs, myths, and paintings vanished when seas rose, when caves collapsed, when time erased fragile traces? We will never know them all, but those we do know are enough to show us that Ice Age humans lived rich inner lives, filled with expression and meaning. As you drift deeper into this story, let the thought rest with you: the walls of caves, the carvings of bone, the notes of flutes, all carry voices across tens of thousands of years. They tell us that even in a frozen world, humans dreamed, imagined, and remembered. In the next part of our journey, we will leave the echoes of story and step into the warmth of the Holocene, when ice gave way to forests, rivers swelled, and the seeds of civilization were planted in fertile ground. Life found warmth again, and with it, humanity began to build a new kind of world. When the last great glaciers began their final retreat, Earth entered a new chapter. The Holocene, our present warm epoch, arrived about 11,700 years ago. Compared to the wild swings of the Ice Age, it was a period of relative stability, a calm in which the planet found balance. For humans and for countless other species, this warmth was not just a change in climate. It was an opening, a chance to build new ways of living, to expand beyond survival and into settlement. Imagine standing on a plain that had once been tundra, where before only hardy grasses grew. Now birch and pine trees push upwards. Birds return, their calls filling the air. Rivers, swollen with meltwater, wind through fertile valleys. Lakes spread across depressions left by glaciers, becoming oases for fish and waterfowl. The land softens, greens and blossoms. For animals, the transformation was profound. Herds of reindeer, once dominant, retreated northward with the cold. In their place came red deer, boar and aurochs, wild cattle that thrived in the forests. Bison still roamed the plains, but their ranges shrank as woodlands spread. Small mammals, birds and fish multiplied in the warmer ecosystems. For predators, opportunities shifted. Wolves followed deer into new forests. Bears claimed rivers rich with salmon. The world reorganized, not through extinction alone, but through renewal. Humans, too, adapted. For tens of thousands of years, they had been hunters and gatherers, moving with herds and seasons. Now, in some places, they began to linger. The Holocene's stable climate allowed wild plants to grow predictably, year after year. Some groups discovered that they could not only harvest these plants, but encourage their growth, scattering seeds, weeding patches, and eventually cultivating fields. In the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, wheat and barley were among the first to be domesticated. Villages such as Jericho grew around these new food sources, with stone houses and storage pits. Goats and sheep were tamed, their milk, wool, and meat providing steady sustenance. In China, rice and millet became staples along the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers. In the Americas, maize, beans, and squash formed the foundation of diets, while in Africa, sorghum and yams played central roles. The shift from foraging to farming was not sudden, nor was it universal. Many people continued to hunt and gather, and some still do today. But the Holocene gave farming the chance to flourish. With food surpluses, populations grew. With permanent villages, new social structures formed. And with settled life came pottery, weaving, and eventually writing. Civilization's seeds lay in the warmth of this epoch. Forests play their part as well. Where once ice had ground bare rock, trees now anchored soil, creating rich ecosystems. The spread of forests provided timber, fuel, and shelter for humans. They also created new challenges: clearing land for crops, navigating dense woodlands, and living alongside animals both prey and predator. Yet people adapted, just as they had on the steppe, finding ways to use the forest's bounty. Rivers carried the gifts of glaciers into this new age. Meltwater carved valleys and deposited fertile silts, creating some of the richest farmlands on Earth. The Nile's annual floods nourished Egyptian fields. The Tigris and Euphrates sustained Mesopotamian cities. The Indus River Valley blossomed with villages that would become early urban centres. In China, the Yellow River carried loess soil, fine and fertile, supporting dense populations. Without the glacial past, these rivers might not have flowed as they do. Civilization rose on their banks because ice had once melted in distant mountains. The warming also shaped coastlines. As seas stabilized near their modern levels, new habitats formed along estuaries and shores. Humans learned to fish with nets, to harvest shellfish, and to travel by boat. Coastal communities thrived, connecting with one another across bays and seas. Trade began with simple goods: obsidian, shells, salt. But it laid the foundation for networks that would later span continents. Pause here and imagine life in one of these early Holocene villages. The air is warmer than in the generations before. Fields of barley ripple in the breeze. Goats graze nearby, their bells tinkling softly. Children play among clay pots drying in the sun. Smoke rises from hearths, carrying the scent of baking bread. At night, families gather under roofs of reeds or stone, telling stories of ancestors who once roamed with mammoths and reindeer. The world has changed, but memory lingers. Not all was gentle. The warmth also brought challenges. Forests encroached on grasslands, reducing grazing for wild herds. Some hunters resisted farming, clinging to their way of life. Diseases spread more easily in settled communities, where people and animals lived close together. Conflicts arose over land and resources. Yet, even with these struggles, the overall trajectory was upward. Larger populations, more complex societies, richer cultural life. Archaeological sites reveal this growth. At Çatalhöyük in modern Turkey, thousands lived in tightly packed mud brick houses more than 9,000 years ago. Walls were decorated with paintings, and burials beneath floors suggest strong family ties. In the Levant, Jericho grew into one of the first true towns, with walls and towers protecting its people. These were not yet cities as we know them, but they were far beyond the temporary camps of the Ice Age. The Holocene also saw the domestication of the dog complete its course. Though wolves had begun their partnership with humans earlier, in the Ice Age, the warm epoch cemented the bond. Dogs guarded herds, hunted alongside people, and became companions in settled homes. Their presence is found in burials, often lying beside their human partners. The Ice Age gave us survival. The Holocene gave us partnership. Climate remained central. While the Holocene was stable compared to the Ice Age, it was not perfectly smooth. Droughts, floods, and smaller fluctuations challenged societies. Around 8,200 years ago, a sudden cooling event disrupted weather patterns for centuries. Yet humans endured, adapting crops, moving settlements, and developing new strategies. Stability did not mean stillness, but it gave space for resilience to deepen. Think again of the scale of change. Just a few thousand years earlier, Europe had been under kilometres of ice. Mammoths had roamed where farms now grew, seas had swallowed entire plains. And now, villages dotted river valleys, fields stretched across hills, and humans were shaping landscapes deliberately. It is a transformation almost unimaginable in scope, yet it happened in the span of a few hundred generations. The Holocene warmth nurtured more than survival. It nurtured culture. Pottery allowed storage of grain and water. Weaving created cloth. Trade carried not only goods, but ideas, new farming methods, new tools, new stories. Spiritual practices evolved, tied to cycles of planting and harvest, to rivers and rains. Temples began to rise, carved stones aligned with the stars, as humans sought to understand their place in a still mysterious but more predictable world. And here is a gentle thought to hold. The stability of the Holocene may be the reason you are here, listening now. Without it, perhaps no cities would have risen, no books written, no science developed to reveal the Ice Age at all. The calm warmth gave humanity time to grow beyond survival, to build the foundations of knowledge and memory. Yet, a quiet question lingers. If warmth gave life new possibilities, how fragile is that gift? The Ice Age taught us that climates can turn suddenly. The Holocene has so far been kind, but is it permanent? Or is it only another pause, another breath in the long rhythm of the earth? For now, rest with the image of a warming world. Glaciers retreat into distant mountains. Rivers swell and feed fertile valleys. Villages rise, smoke curling into soft skies. Humanity begins to weave its future, not in the harsh winds of the steppe, but in the calm warmth of fields and hearths. Life has found warmth again. In the next part of this journey, we will leave the fields and rivers for the laboratories of modern science, where ice cores and sediments reveal the hidden record of Earth's past. In those frozen archives, the story of the Ice Ages is written in bubbles of ancient air and grains of dust. Secrets waiting beneath our feet. The Ice Age may seem like a distant story, but its traces remain all around us. They lie in the stones beneath our feet, in the shapes of valleys and lakes, and in the silent archives of ice that have endured for hundreds of thousands of years. Scientists today read those traces as if they were pages in a book written not in ink, but in layers of snow, sediment and rock. Each page tells us something about Earth's past, about how glaciers advanced and retreated, about how climates shifted and stabilized. And through these records, we glimpse not only what has been, but what may yet come. One of the most remarkable archives is the ice core. In Greenland and Antarctica, scientists drilled deep into the ice, sometimes more than 3 kilometers down. Each layer of ice began as snow, falling year after year, compressing into solid layers. Trapped within those layers are tiny bubbles of air, frozen samples of the atmosphere at the moment the snow fell. When those bubbles are analysed, they reveal the composition of ancient air. How much carbon dioxide, how much methane, how much oxygen. Imagine holding a cylinder of ice, perfectly clear, drawn from deep beneath the Antarctic surface. Within it are bubbles that have not seen daylight for hundreds of thousands of years. Each one is a time capsule, carrying the breath of the Earth from long ago. Scientists melt the ice carefully, capture the gases, and measure their concentrations with precise instruments. In this way, they reconstruct the climate history of the planet, step by step, year by year. What they find is striking. Levels of carbon dioxide and methane rise and fall in rhythm with the ice ages. When ice sheets grew, greenhouse gases dropped. When ice melted, gases rose. The connection is clear. Earth's atmosphere and its climate dance together in cycles, each influencing the other. Temperature records from ice cores show sharp shifts, sudden warmings and coolings, echoing the turning points we have already walked through. Dust is another silent witness. During glacial times, strong winds carried fine particles across continents, depositing them on ice and land alike. In cores, these dusty layers appear darker, a signal of drier, harsher conditions. In warmer times, dust levels fall, replaced by clearer ice. Even volcanic eruptions leave their marks. Thin, dark lines of ash, sometimes global in extent, recording the blasts that shook the sky. Sediments beneath oceans hold a parallel story. Tiny organisms called foraminifera lived near the surface, building shells of calcium carbonate. When they died, their shells sank to the seafloor, layer upon layer. The chemistry of those shells reflects the temperature of the water in which they grew. By studying them, scientists reconstruct past ocean temperatures, salinity, and currents. These records, when compared with ice cores, give a global picture. The Earth as a system, oceans and atmosphere intertwined. Rocks on land carry their own testimony. Striations, grooves carved into bedrock, show where glaciers once dragged across stone. Moraines, ridges of debris, mark the edges of glaciers where they once paused before retreating. Erratics, giant boulders far from their source, reveal how ice carried stones across hundreds of kilometers before setting them down in strange places. If you walk through parts of New England, Canada, or Northern Europe, you may stumble upon such boulders, silent monuments to vanished ice. Lakes, too, preserve memory. In their depths, sediments settle year after year, often in thin, distinct layers. Some lakes freeze each winter, leaving light and dark bands that can be counted like tree rings. Within those bands lie pollen grains carried by wind and water. By examining the types of pollen, scientists can tell which plants grew nearby in different eras. In this way, we see forests advancing and retreating, grasslands spreading and shrinking, ecosystems responding to the climate's breath. Together, these records create a tapestry of evidence. The rhythm of orbital cycles, the waxing and waning of ice, the sudden jolts of events like the Younger Dryas, all are written in ice and stone. And when different records are compared, the story grows sharper. The match between orbital calculations and climate data is astonishing, confirming the deep connection between Earth's motion and its ice ages. Pause for a moment and imagine the scene of a research station in Antarctica. Snow stretches endlessly in every direction, the air crisp and dry. A team of scientists works around a drilling rig, drawing up cores of ice that glisten in the pale light. Each piece is carefully logged, packed, and preserved. Back in laboratories, thousands of kilometres away, instruments hum as they read the secrets of those frozen bubbles. Out of the silence of ice, voices of the past emerge. The knowledge we gain from these traces is not only about what has happened, but about what might happen again. Ice cores show that Earth's climate has never been static. It swings between states, sometimes abruptly. The Holocene, with its relative calm, is unusual in its stability. Knowing this, we understand how delicate our current balance is, and how easily it could change. Archaeology, geology, climatology all converge on this truth. The Ice Age still lives in the bones of the Earth. Glaciers that carved valleys, rivers fed by meltwater, soils enriched by glacial flower. These are not relics of the past, but foundations of the present. Our fertile plains, our great rivers, even the placement of our coasts, all bear the signature of ice. And yet, the traces also carry warning. They show us that climate can shift in decades, not millennia. They remind us that seas can rise, floods can come, forests can vanish. In their quiet testimony, they urge us to see ourselves as part of a story far older than our cities, older even than our species. Consider again the ice, deep and silent, layered through time. Each bubble of air whispers, the earth has changed before, and it will change again. Each layer of dust, each shell in the ocean floor, each groove in the stone says the same. Nothing is permanent, not ice, not warmth, not even the land beneath our feet. And yet, in that impermanence lies continuity. Just as scientists read the past in cores and rocks, so too will future generations read traces of us. In sediments, in fossils, in whatever marks we leave behind. The Ice Age shows that memory is written into the earth itself, waiting to be found. As you let these thoughts settle, imagine yourself holding a fragment of ice, clear and cold. Within it is a breath from 100,000 years ago, a trace of mammoths, of hunters, of forests long gone. That breath drifts now into your imagination, connecting you to a world both lost and alive. In the next part of our journey, we will look not backward, but forward. If ice ages come in cycles, will another arrive? Or has humanity, through its own actions, shifted the rhythm forever? The next ice age is a question of both science and destiny, and it waits just beyond the horizon of time. The Earth has never been static. Across millions of years, ice has come and gone, advancing like a tide and retreating again. For more than 2 million years, the Pleistocene epoch followed this rhythm. Glacial periods lasting tens of thousands of years, separated by shorter, warm interglacials. By that pattern, one question naturally arises. If ice has returned again and again, will it return once more? Is another ice age waiting in our future? The answer is complex. To begin, it helps to remember what drives the cycle. Earth's orbit around the Sun is not fixed. It stretches and contracts, tilts and wobbles, in cycles measured in tens of thousands of years. These orbital variations, called Milankovitch cycles, change how sunlight falls on Earth's surface, particularly in the high latitudes of the Northern Hemisphere. When summers there are cool, snow lingers year after year, glaciers build, and eventually an ice age begins. When summers are warm, ice retreats. If we looked only at these cycles, the Earth would seem due for another glaciation. The Holocene, the warm interglacial we live in, has already lasted about 11,700 years. Past interglacials were often similar in length. By the natural rhythm, the planet might soon be expected to cool again, with ice creeping southward, forests shrinking, and seas falling. But something has changed. In the last 2 centuries, humans have altered the atmosphere in ways unseen in all previous cycles. Carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases have risen sharply due to the burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, and industrial activity. Ice cores show that current levels of carbon dioxide are higher than at any point in the last 800,000 years. The warming effect of these gases is powerful, overwhelming the subtle shifts of orbital cycles. Climate models suggest that this human-driven warming has delayed the onset of the next ice age. Without our influence, Earth might have begun cooling in the next few thousand years, setting the stage for new glaciers. Instead, rising greenhouse gases have tipped the balance toward continued warmth. In a sense, we have broken the rhythm, at least for now. Pause and consider the irony. For most of history, humans feared the cold. Survival in the Ice Age meant constant struggle, fire, and fur against the wind. Now, in our efforts to build industry and comfort, we have pushed the Earth away from cold, into a warming it has not seen for hundreds of thousands of years. The very threat has reversed. Instead of glaciers advancing, we worry about glaciers retreating too fast, seas rising instead of falling. Does this mean the ice ages are over forever? Likely not. Orbital cycles continue, steady and indifferent to our actions. Over tens of thousands of years, they will still shape the tilt and path of the Earth. If greenhouse gases one day decline, either through human action or natural processes, the cycles could regain their influence. Ice may yet return, though perhaps on a different timeline than before. What would another ice age mean? Imagine, tens of thousands of years from now, if glaciers once again advanced across Canada and northern Europe. Cities would vanish under ice. Seas would fall, revealing new land bridges. Ecosystems would reorganize, and humanity, or whatever species exists then, would adapt once more. It is a distant possibility, not a threat of our lifetimes, but a reminder that Earth's story is larger than any one age. Some scientists even suggest that the Holocene may already be ending, replaced by what they call the Anthropocene, a new epoch defined by human influence. If so, the pattern of past ice ages may no longer apply in the same way. We have become not just passengers in the Earth system, but active participants, shaping its climate alongside the orbital cycles and geological forces. Still, it is worth pausing to reflect on scale. The last ice age ended only about 12,000 years ago. That is a blink in geological terms, but for us, it is longer than all recorded history. Agriculture, writing, cities, nations, all arose in the warmth of the Holocene. If another ice age comes tens of thousands of years from now, it will again reshape everything. Yet for the humans alive today, the pressing concern is not distant ice, but present warmth. And here lies a paradox. The very knowledge we gained by studying past ice ages helps us understand today's changes. Ice cores, sediments, and fossils show us how sensitive the climate is, how quickly it can turn. They remind us that the Holocene is unusual in its calm, and that even small shifts in energy balance can unleash enormous transformations. Consider once more the question, will there be a next ice age? The answer, softly, is yes, eventually. The cycles are patient, and over a long time they will prevail. But in the nearer term, our actions have delayed it, perhaps by tens of thousands of years. We live in an interglacial that may be stretched unnaturally long, not by nature alone, but by human hands. This knowledge brings both awe and humility. Awe because we now see ourselves woven into the deep rhythms of the planet. Humility because those rhythms are larger than us and will continue long after we are gone. We may shift their timing, but we cannot erase them. Ice will come and go, warmth will rise and fall, and earth will turn on. For tonight, let the thought be gentle. The next ice age, if it comes, is far beyond our horizon. What we face now is different. A warming world, seas rising, glaciers retreating. Yet the memory of ice still matters. It teaches us resilience, reminds us of impermanence, and shows us that even the mightiest glaciers can melt, and even the deepest cold can pass. And so, rest with this image. The Earth turning slowly, its orbit shifting in cycles longer than empires, longer than civilizations. Glaciers wait in the distant future, but for now, rivers flow free, forests spread, and the seas lap gently at our coasts. The ice may return one day, but the story of Earth continues, with us as one brief chapter in its vast book. In the final part of our journey, we will step back and look at the whole arc, the story of ice and fire, of cold and warmth, of humanity shaped by the frost and carried into the present. It is a story with no true ending, only pauses as the Earth keeps turning. The Earth remembers. Even when glaciers melt, when forests spread, when the cities rise, the planet carries the traces of its past. Valleys carved by ice, plains left by rivers of meltwater, dust buried in cores of ice. All whisper the same truth. Nothing is lost. It only changes form, waiting to be read again. When we look at the long arc of history, the Ice Age is not an isolated story. It is part of the planet's deep rhythm, the slow inhale and exhale of cold and warmth. For 2.5 million years, this rhythm shaped every continent, every species, and ultimately humanity itself. Without it, there would be no fertile plains, no great rivers, no civilizations as we know them. The memory of ice is written into the foundations of our lives. Pause for a moment and think of the Great Lakes in North America. They shine like inland seas, supporting millions of people. Yet they are scars of glaciers, basins carved by ice and filled by meltwater. Or think of the fjords of Norway, dramatic cliffs rising above calm waters. Another legacy of glaciers retreating. Even the soil in which crops grow carries the gift of glacial dust, ground from mountains and scattered by wind. Every harvest, every loaf of bread, has some link to the ancient ice. The memory also lives in us. Our ancestors endured the cold, adapted to scarcity, and created bonds of cooperation that carried them forward. The resilience learned in the Ice Age still flows in human culture. Fire, clothing, shelter, art, music, each was refined in the crucible of cold. The very act of storytelling, which you are hearing now, has roots in people gathered around Ice Age fires, sharing knowledge and weaving meaning into the night. Yet memory is not only practical, it is emotional. Flood myths echo the rising seas that drowned Doggerland, Sunderland, and other lost lands. Tales of endless winters recall the sudden chill of the Younger Dryas. Stories of giants may be faint memories of mammoths, cave bears, or other vanished creatures. In this way, the Ice Age lingers not just in landscapes, but in imagination. Science, too, keeps the memory alive. Each ice core drilled in Greenland or Antarctica is a library of frozen years. Each layer of sediment in a lake is a page in Earth's diary. Together they remind us that our world has changed before and will change again. They teach us humility, that stability is precious, and that climates can shift faster than we expect. And now, in our own time, we face choices. The Holocene warmth has nurtured civilization, but our actions are altering it. Glaciers retreat faster than they once advanced. Seas rise again, not from natural cycles alone, but from human influence. The memory of the Ice Age becomes a mirror, showing us both the fragility of our world and the resilience of life. But let this not be a warning alone. Let it also be a comfort. The planet has endured far greater changes than those of our brief history. It has frozen, thawed, and frozen again. Life has adapted, shifted, and survived. Humanity too carries that capacity. The Ice Age shows that even in the harshest times, creativity, cooperation, and meaning can thrive. As you listen now, perhaps in the quiet of a night, imagine Earth turning beneath you. Continents drift slowly. Glaciers melt in the high mountains. Oceans lap against familiar coasts. Above, stars wheel in silent arcs, as they did for Ice Age hunters and for the first farmers of the Holocene. Time is vast, but memory connects us. Think of the handprints in caves. A child pressing their palm to stone, leaving a mark that endures 30,000 years. That hand reached through time to touch us, and in some way we reach back, acknowledging their world, remembering their struggles and dreams. The memory of the planet is also the memory of people, each generation leaving traces for the next. The Ice Age is over but not gone. Its marks are everywhere, if we know how to see them. In the curve of a valley, in the fertile soil, in the myths told by ancestors, in the bubbles of ancient air trapped in ice. It waits quietly beneath our feet and within our stories. So let the thought be soft, the earth never forgets. It carries every chapter, every cycle, every breath of cold and warmth. We are part of that long memory, living now in a warm interlude, but shaped by the frost of ages past. And as this journey closes, let your mind rest. The story of Earth is long, far longer than any life or civilization. Tonight, we have walked through one chapter, from the building of ice to the melting of giants, from the first humans in the frost to the warmth of the Holocene. The rest of the story can wait. The planet never sleeps, but you can. Let the earth keep turning while you rest, carrying its long memory forward, quiet and steady, through the night.